The night the drunk cowboy heard his son's name spoken in church, he almost turned and ran. Caleb Holt stood just inside the doorway, swaying slightly, the smell of whiskey clinging to him like a second coat. The chapel was warm with lamplight and murmured prayers, a fragile refuge from the bitter wind howling outside. He had not come seeking grace. He had come because the cold had finally beaten him. Because the saloon had closed its doors, and because some restless ache in his chest refused to let him wander the streets any longer. He pulled his hat low and slipped into the last pew, a man hoping not to be seen by God or neighbor alike. Then the preacher spoke a name that split his life clean in two. Let us bow our heads and pray for Samuel Holt. Caleb's breath stopped. His heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped animal. Samuel. The word echoed through his skull, dragging memories he had buried deep beneath years of drink and silence. For a moment the church vanished. He saw a small hand wrapped around his finger. He heard a child's laugh carried on summer air. He felt the weight of a promise he had never kept. Caleb clenched his fists, knuckles white, as the preacher continued. A young man seeking his way, the preacher said gently. And for his father lost to sorrow and drink that he may yet find the courage to return. Caleb's head lifted, slow and trembling, lost to sorrow and drink. The words were not cruel. They were worse. They were true. Redemption Creek was the kind of frontier town that remembered everything. It remembered who you'd been, what you'd done, and what you'd failed to become. Its buildings leaned into the wind as if weary from holding secrets too long. Dust ruled the streets by day. Regret ruled the nights. Once, Caleb Holt had been one of its proudest sons. He had arrived young and strong with a good horse and steady hands. He worked cattle from dawn to dark, saved every spare coin, and built a ranch at the edge of town where the land rolled wide and forgiving. When he married Mary Whitaker, the schoolteacher with kind eyes and an unshakable faith, folks said even the plains seemed to soften around him. Samuel was born during a spring rain that turned the fields green overnight. Caleb had held his son with reverent fear, swearing softly that the boy would never know hunger, never know abandonment, never know the bitterness that had shaped his own childhood. For a few precious years, life believed him. Then the world grew harsh. A drought cracked the land. Cattle fell ill. Debt crept in like a slow poison. Caleb worked harder, slept less. When Mary took sick, he prayed with a desperation that frightened him. When she died, something inside him went silent forever. Samuel was 6 when his mother was laid to rest. Caleb tried to be both parents. He failed more often than he succeeded. The bottle became easier than the truth. The saloon offered noise when the house was too quiet. And the boy, bright-eyed and trusting, became a mirror Caleb could not bear to look into. One morning before dawn, he saddled his horse and left a note on the table. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself the boy would be better off. He told himself lies until they sounded like mercy. He never came back. The preacher's words faded, replaced by a low murmur as the congregation shifted. Caleb realized his hands were shaking. He pressed them to his knees, forcing himself to breathe. Then he saw him. Near the front pew, seated beside an older woman, was a young man with broad shoulders and a stillness that spoke of restraint. His dark hair was neatly combed. His posture was straight, disciplined. He did not fidget like the others. He listened. As if sensing a presence, the young man turned. Their eyes met. Caleb felt the blow in his bones. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same gray eyes, the same solemn brow. Even the scar on his chin, a childhood tumble, Caleb remembered with painful clarity. Samuel, grown, solid, real, and looking at him without warmth. Caleb's chest tightened. He wanted to stand, he wanted to run. He did neither. When the final hymn ended, people rose, whispering greetings and condolences. Caleb remained seated, rooted by fear and shame. He watched Samuel stand and speak quietly to the woman beside him, Mary's sister. He realized dimly. The past refused to stay buried. Samuel turned and began walking toward the back, toward him. Each step felt like judgment approaching. Caleb's mouth went dry. He searched for words that might bridge 20 years of absence. None came. Samuel stopped a few feet away. "You're Caleb Holt," he said. Caleb nodded once. "I am." "I thought so," Samuel replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a storm. "When the preacher said my name, you looked like you'd been struck." Caleb swallowed hard. "Samuel." "I don't." Samuel said quietly. Not here. Caleb's shoulders sagged with a strange mix of relief and dread. Then why speak to me at all? Samuel glanced around the church, at the curious faces pretending not to watch. Because running is done, he said. For both of us. He paused, then added, meet me at sunrise. Old Holt Ranch. Caleb's breath caught. The ranch hasn't, I know, Samuel said. That's why. Without another word, he turned and walked away, boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. Caleb sat alone as the church emptied, the lamplight flickering like uncertain hope. Outside, the wind carried the promise of dawn. For the first time in 20 years, Caleb Holt knew exactly where he was going. And he feared what waited for him there more than anything the night had ever held. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales from the Old West. We'll see you next time. Caleb Holt didn't sleep that night. He lay on the narrow cot in the room he rented above the feed store, staring at the low ceiling while the wind scraped its nails along the window. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep from the past, coming to claim him. When dawn finally broke, pale and unforgiving, he rose with the slow heaviness of a man walking toward his own sentence. He washed his face in cold water, scrubbing as if he might erase the years from his skin. The mirror showed him a stranger hair gone gray at the temples, eyes dulled by regret. Still, he pulled on his old coat, brushed the dust from his hat, and stepped outside, years from his skin. The mirror showed him a stranger hair gone gray at the temples, eyes dulled by regret. Still, he pulled on his old coat, brushed the dust from his hat, and stepped outside. The ride to the Holt Ranch was quiet. Frost clung to the ground. One shutter hung loose, creaking softly in the breeze. The barn stood dark and hollow, its doors askew like broken arms reaching out. Caleb reined in his horse and sat there. One shutter hung loose, creaking softly in the breeze. The barn stood dark and hollow, its doors askew like broken arms reaching out. Caleb reined in his horse and sat there, unable to dismount, the place pressing down on him with the full force of what he had abandoned. Samuel was already there. One shutter hung loose, creaking softly in the breeze. The barn stood dark and hollow, its doors askew like broken arms reaching out. Caleb reined in his horse and sat there, unable to dismount, the place pressing down on him with the full force of what he had abandoned. Samuel was already there. Said there were things she could no longer carry alone. He paused. She told me the truth about you, about the note, about the money you sent when you could, about the letters you never answered. Caleb's shoulders sagged. There's no excuse. No, Samuel agreed. There isn't. They stood in the quiet kitchen, two men bound by blood and distance, neither knowing how to cross it. She told me the truth about you, about the note, about the money you sent when you could, about the letters you never answered. Caleb's shoulders sagged. There's no excuse. No, Samuel agreed. There isn't. Said there were things she could no longer carry alone. He paused. She told me the truth about you, about the note, about the money you sent when you could, about the letters you never answered. Caleb's shoulders sagged. There's no excuse. No, Samuel agreed. There isn't. They stood in the quiet kitchen, two men bound by blood and distance, neither knowing how to cross it. I wasn't worth it, Caleb replied. Samuel's eyes hardened. That's not your decision to make. They walked outside, the cold biting sharper now. They walked outside, the cold biting sharper now. Samuel led him toward the barn. Inside, sunlight streamed through the broken boards, illuminating a small figure kneeling beside a makeshift stall. A boy looked up, his eyes wide. Caleb froze. I wasn't worth it, Caleb replied. Samuel's eyes hardened. That's not your decision to make. They walked outside, the cold biting sharper now. Samuel led him toward the barn. Inside, sunlight streamed through the broken boards, illuminating a small figure kneeling beside a makeshift stall. A boy looked up, his eyes wide. Caleb froze. But I need to know if this land still means anything to you. Because if it doesn't, I'll sell it and take Eli somewhere else. Caleb looked around at the broken boards, the empty stalls, the land he had bled for. Then he looked at the boy, standing small and hopeful in the cold. For the first time in decades, because if it doesn't, I'll sell it and take Eli somewhere else. Caleb looked around at the broken boards, the empty stalls, the land he had bled for. Then he looked at the boy, standing small and hopeful in the cold. But I need to know if this land still means anything to you. Because if it doesn't, I'll sell it and take Eli somewhere else. Caleb looked around at the broken boards, the empty stalls, the land he had bled for. Then he looked at the boy, standing small and hopeful in the cold. For the first time in decades, the bottle did not call to him. This land is yours, Caleb said. It always was. But I need to know if this land still means anything to you. Because if it doesn't, I'll sell it and take Eli somewhere else. Caleb looked around at the broken boards, the empty stalls, the land he had bled for. Then he looked at the boy, standing small and hopeful in the cold. For the first time in decades, the bottle did not call to him. This land is yours, Caleb said. It always was. The first week nearly broke him. Caleb Holt had faced stampedes, blizzards, and men with guns drawn, but nothing tested him like the quiet discipline of staying sober while the past watched from every corner of the ranch. The bottle called to him at night, whispering promises of sleep and forgetfulness. He answered it by stepping outside, splitting wood until his hands blistered. By kneeling beside his bed and praying words that came out rough and unsure. Samuel watched without comment. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk. Boards were replaced, fences straightened, the barn roof patched. The land responded the way it always had to honest labor and steady hands. Eli followed them everywhere. Asking questions, holding nails, listening wide-eyed to stories of cattle drives and distant rivers. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, Eli tugged at Caleb's sleeve. "Mr. Holt," he said shyly, "were you really a cowboy?" Caleb smiled faintly. "I still am, just a rusty one." Eli grinned, and something warm stirred in Caleb's chest, something he had not felt in a long, long time. That night, Samuel finally spoke. "You didn't drink," he said, sitting on the porch steps. "No," Caleb replied. "I wanted to," Samuel nodded. "So did my uncle, until it killed him." The confession hung heavy between them. "I was angry at you for a long time," Samuel continued. "But anger takes more strength than I have left." Caleb swallowed hard. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," Samuel said. "But Eli does." Winter came early that year. Snow swept across the plains, sealing Redemption Creek in a profound white silence. Caleb feared the cold, feared the long nights, feared himself. But each morning he rose and found purpose waiting for him in the chores, in the routine, in the steady presence of his son and grandson. Then the sickness came. Eli took ill one night, burning with a fever that raged like a wildfire. Samuel rode hard for the doctor, but the storm turned him back, the blizzard a merciless white wall against him. Back at the ranch, Caleb sat by the boy's bed, cooling his brow with a damp cloth, whispering prayers he had learned as a child and forgotten as a man. He pleaded with a God he felt he had no right to address, not for himself, but for the small boy breathing shallowly in the dim lamplight. "Don't leave," Eli murmured, his voice a thread of sound in the quiet room. "I won't," Caleb said, his own voice breaking. "I swear it." By dawn, the fever broke. Samuel returned, exhausted and defeated, to find Caleb asleep in the chair, his hands still wrapped protectively around the boy's. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching. The rigid lines of resentment he'd carried for years seemed to soften. Something inside him shifted, making way for a feeling he couldn't yet name. Spring thawed the land, and with it, their guarded hearts. The ranch breathed again. Calves were born, their bleats filling the crisp air. Laughter, a sound long absent, returned to the house, mostly from Eli, but sometimes a shared smile between the two men. Redemption Creek took notice. People who had once whispered about the return of the prodigal father now watched him with a different kind of curiosity. One Sunday morning, Caleb walked back into the church. He was clean, steady, sober. He sat beside Samuel this time, not behind him. When the preacher spoke of redemption, of second chances and the grace that finds us even in our darkest moments, Caleb did not look away. He felt the words settle in him, not as a judgment, but as a promise. After the service, Samuel stopped him outside, beneath the vast, open sky. "I'm going east," Samuel said, his voice quiet. "My aunt passed last night." Caleb's chest tightened. He felt a familiar pang of loss, of things ending. "I'm sorry, Samuel." "She left me her land," Samuel continued, his gaze drifting over the ranch. He watched Eli chasing a bird across the yard, his small form a whirlwind of pure joy. But this, he gestured to the familiar fences, the old barn, the sprawling fields, this is where I belong. He looked at Caleb then, truly looked at him, with eyes that were no longer clouded by anger. I won't call you father, Samuel said. Not yet. Caleb nodded, accepting the boundary, grateful for the honesty. I'll take whatever name you give me. Samuel held out his hand, a gesture that bridged years of silence and pain. Stay. Caleb took it. The handshake was firm, solid, a new foundation being laid. Years later, folks would say Redemption Creek had witnessed a miracle. Not the loud, flashy kind with thunder and lightning, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from men choosing, day after day, to be better than they were yesterday. Caleb Holt never touched the bottle again. The whispers in the night faded, replaced by the sounds of a family healing. He taught Eli how to ride a horse, how to mend fences, and how to pray when the nights grew heavy with doubt. Samuel built a life rooted in patience and truth, his quiet strength becoming the bedrock of their world. And when Caleb finally passed, old and at peace in his own bed, his hand rested in his son's. The preacher stood before the small congregation gathered to say their goodbyes. This is a story of a man who found his way home, he said, his voice resonating with the simple truth of it. And as the sun dipped low over the plains, painting the sky in gold and fire, Samuel tipped his hat and whispered the words Caleb had waited a lifetime to hear. Goodbye, father. The wind carried them across the land. And the land, which had witnessed it all, remembered. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing for more. Until next time.